podcasts are available anywhere. So anybody that says that, we're going to get your podcast on Spotify and Apple and all this, well, that's what every podcast, every podcast hosting site should do. And if they don't, you have no business working with them. So everybody does that. But the thing is discoverability.
What does it actually mean for a podcast to be discoverable? Especially if the listener never even opens a podcast app. And then how do you decide not which episode to surface, but the exact second someone should be listening? Most podcasters are not thinking this because, well, let's be honest, most distribution still assumes one thing: get someone into a listening platform, and that's where they press play. This conversation, it flips that. Today's guest is working inside a system where podcasts aren't completely the destination. They're the layer that sits inside something else. Articles get published, traffic exists, and then audio gets inserted, matched, and surfaced based on context. Today's guest is John Matarazzo, who's the media manager for the Charisma Podcast Network, which sits within a much larger media company that started as a print magazine back in 1975, expanded into book publishing, and then later built out a podcast network around that existing audience. John, he didn't start in podcasting. He was producing television, launching his own podcast in 2019, and that path eventually led him to helping manage and scale the network to roughly 70 shows. I'm Greg Wasserman, the host of this amazing show, Podcast Network Insights. I've spent 15 years of my career in advertising sales, and since 2021, I've been immersed in the podcast industry. I believe that life is about time and relationships. You never know where one conversation may lead. And I've built tons of relationships, especially in the podcast ecosystem, from solo creators to, like my guests, the heads of podcast networks. If you've ever wondered what it's like joining a network and if it makes sense, how these networks actually run, other networks you could explore joining, advertising with, partnering with, learning from, my goal is to give you a real look behind the scenes so you can confidently navigate whether you host, produce, sponsor, or run a network. As you listen to this episode, pay attention to how that matching system actually works, how episodes get embedded within written content, how AI determines relevance, and why that might be a very different answer to discoverability than what most creators are chasing. And stay tuned after the interview, if there's more to the conversation. And no, it's not to get you to subscribe to the show on your favorite platform and leave a review. But let's be honest, if you're listening to this, you should probably do that. And I appreciate you for doing that. And it's not to encourage you to sign up for my newsletter and discover more podcasts to check out, though you probably should do that as well, since discovery is one of the hardest things in podcasting. So with all that said, let's get into this conversation. Well, John, the show is called Podcast Network Insights. So I always like to start with the first question being like, when you hear podcast network, what does that mean to you?
That's a great question, because I had that question so many times before. I joined a podcast network many years ago in 2019, or actually 2020 is whenever my podcast became part of the Charisma Podcast Network. Really, it is in my context of it now, especially it is a group of podcasts that have kind of a like-minded vision and goal, and are able to kind of promote each other, help each other out, and have some sort of a community especially in the podcasting space, where everything can be so individual, because for the most part, we're doing interviews like this, where remotely we're in a room. I'm alone in a room here, and I'm talking to you halfway, or on the other side of the country. So it's nice to be able to have people that you can bounce ideas off of, and you can talk about the same type of topics, and be able to help promote each other the best way that you can. So that's kind of what I look at as a podcast network. I know there's some people that actually take it a lot further, and they'll actually do like more programmatic ads with each other and things like that. But we've been able to share guests and share hosts. People interview each other on our podcast network, and that's kind of what I'm looking at whenever I'm considering a podcast network.
Thanks so much. So I guess for anyone that's listening here, you've talked about now the Charisma Podcast Network. So we'll do the intro. We kind of call that out, but Charisma Podcast Network is actually part of a 50-year-old media company, Charisma's Media, right?
Yes.
So give us a little context about, because you're a component of a larger entity. The podcasts are part of a larger entity. So give us a little
Right.
understanding of the overall business.
So, Charisma Magazine started in 1975 by Steve and Joy Strang. Steve was a journalist for the Orlando Sentinel, and the church that he was attending at that time, he had the idea of basically creating a newsletter slash magazine and kind of taking it to the next level, as opposed to just like a newsletter, which was kind of popular in the 70s and 80s and gosh, I grew up in the 90s and my church had one too. But that was just like, everything was just printed out on a Xerox machine at that point. But with the Charisma, they actually turned it into a magazine with, with staples and, you open it up, you receive it in the mail. And it became kind of a big deal. And so Charisma Magazine has been around since 1975, as I said, and it really birthed out of this movement of the Holy Spirit-filled charismatic world within the Christian community. And so as different pockets of revival and these powerful, life-changing meetings were happening in different places around the country and subsequently around the world, as those were happening, they were reporting about what was happening and talking about that and really helping the Christian community at large find out what was happening, because we're recording this in 2026, but in 1975, there was no such thing as the internet. And so for a niche community to be able to have information about what was happening in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, you really needed to have some sort of a trustworthy source that you can hear about a revival service that was happening in Brownsville, Florida, or in Toronto, Canada, or in Buenos Aires, in Argentina, and all these different places where you would hear these testimonies of these amazing things that were happening, and also who were the leaders in this, and who were the people that God was really using, and what's their stories, and what are they teaching, what are they preaching about, what are the things that we're seeing most impact. And so those are the types of stories and articles that were in those magazines, highlighting some of those leaders and those features. And that grew over the years, and the staff for the magazine grew, and then it actually partnered with a magazine called Christian Life, and they actually had a book publishing arm, and that's how Charisma Media became a book publishing company. And we've been book publishing. I honestly forget the specific year we started that, but we now have over 20 New York Times bestsellers. We have some great authors that we've been working with, like Jonathan Cahn. He has had 10 New York Times bestsellers ever since his very first book. They've all been New York Times bestsellers, and so I actually just read the early manuscript for his next book that's coming out in September 1st, and it is phenomenal. I can't wait for the people to read that. So what I get to do now with Charisma Media, because it went from magazines to magazines plus books, and now books is like probably the biggest part of what we do. But we started finding that in probably around 2015 is when the podcast network got started. We had a few podcasts within the company. And so it was a great way for them to do interviews and to kind of promote some of the authors and just some of the articles that were happening on our website. And then other people started getting interested in the podcasting world and saw that Charisma had a unique market and an opportunity to connect to a specific niche audience. There's riches in the niches, as we say in the podcasting industry. And so in around 2015, they started with just a handful of podcasts, and then more people decided that they wanted to join the podcast network. And so we had to work out agreements and things like that. But now we're to the point where in 2026, we have podcasts on the network that we host them through rss.com. We've got a great partnership with them. And so those podcasts, people upload their episodes there, and we help manage that. Some people are more tech savvy than others. Some people need assistance, and that's why I'm able to go in the back end and help them out. But what we do is those podcasts get embedded into different articles that we have on our website, and our news website and magazine website has over 3 million views a month, and it's growing all the time. And some of our stuff really does go viral, which is great when that happens. And so when that happens and your podcast is embedded into an article and that is really taking off, that means people are now being aware of your podcast. And we have a great tool that we use that actually uses AI to transcribe everything and then match those programmatically, thematically, contextually. So a podcast episode that matches an article in the best way possible, and then it gets embedded in there, and then people are able to find it, which is one of the biggest problems that podcasters have, is that visibility, and people are, the discoverability. And so we're able to connect that niche market, that niche audience, to the niche podcasters and create raving fans, which is great to be able to do that. So I've seen whenever some of the episodes of my own personal podcast have been embedded in there, I've seen it go, the statistics go, which is great. It goes right up. For those of you that are just listening, I just did like a roller coaster going up the hill there. So I've seen that, and I've seen, it really help grow podcasts in this space. So there's a lot of benefit to that. And so that discoverability, that visibility has been a great portion of it. So now we also have a YouTube channel that I run for Charisma Media. Book publishing, online magazine now, YouTube channel, podcast network, and who knows what's next.
Full media company.
Full media company.
Full media company. There you go.
Yeah.
So if you guys started off on the publishing side of it, when you look at your podcasters and someone that's listening to this going like, oh, this is amazing, I would love to get distribution. What is it that you're looking for? Is it, hey, I want this person to join the network because I'm going to get them from a book publishing piece? Am I getting a person who's already got a book? You're like, hey, let us publish that, and they have a podcast. Like, where does Charisma look at?
Sure.
I hate to say talent, but like talent that would join the network in whatever capacity that works within the media.
There are several of our podcasters that their podcast has garnered our attention to the point where we've looked at books with them, and we've actually done books and published them with us. And then some people are just on the podcast network. Some people's content is never going to quite fit a published book, but it'll fit with the articles that we have. And so once in a while, our editorial team will actually take a podcast and actually do an article from that. And so I'm constantly keeping attention to, what our podcasters are doing and what are some episodes that are out there and how we can maybe even promote those ones specifically. And so once in a while, there's things that we can actually really help with. But what's the, as I was saying, the benefit of the podcast network is connecting the podcast episodes to those specific articles. And so people do want to get discovered. They do want to be seen. But occasionally, whenever somebody gets seen multiple times, it has led to more than just a podcast.
That makes sense. So if anyone's listening, you're like, all right, I'm not ready to write a book, but I would love to get the distribution of what Charisma Media has got out there. There's the fit in that regards. But how many shows are there right now?
Oh, that's a tough question. I should have come more prepared. I want to say there's, because we have people that are, they are hosted completely by us, and then other people, they've just joined with us, and we kind of, pulled our RSS feed and put it into our system and things like that. So I want to say about 70 podcasts right now. It fluctuates depending on the seasons. Some people, they'll stay for a couple years. Some people are just going to be there for, a few months, depending on what works for them. But yeah, sometimes it's been more difficult to juggle managing that many podcasts. But right now we've got a great system, and AI and automation stuff has definitely made my life a lot easier. Whenever I first started this, we didn't have those tools, and I thank God for some of those, because I couldn't do what I'm doing if I didn't have those now.
I guess it's a good one. I mean, I always like to go, if you were to start today, what would you do differently? Since you joined the network, call it 5 years, so halfway into its life, give or take.
Yeah.
And now we've looked at where things are today. And as you mentioned, YouTube, if you were to start a podcast network today, what is it that you're currently doing that you'd still do? What would you have been able to change going like, all right, I didn't get to start this, I'm going to start it now this way?
That's a great question, because there's things I would definitely change, and a lot of the stuff that has happened in the past, I've kind of had to help clean up and systematize and automate, which those things just didn't exist back then. But I love the foundation that our podcast network is on, because we already have that established presence in that charismatic Christian space, which is a very niche audience. And it's kind of hard to connect with. If I was just going to start a podcast network with what I've learned now, it would probably be just, let's find something that everybody, a group of podcasters that are talking about the same thing. Let's figure out how to help each other out, and then let's let's start sharing guests, or start sharing, doing collaborations. You interview me, I interview you, and kind of have some place for that to land, where we can actually promote those things within a community somewhere, and or a website, and kind of build that out. I was blessed with the fact that there was already an established media entity that was starting this. So it was kind of like a startup within an established company, as opposed to a straight up startup. So starting a podcast network from scratch, I would say you have to be really passionate and have enough people with you that are saying, hey, we're going to stick with this for the long haul, and not just cut out whenever they're bored or not, or it gets difficult. But like, you've got the vision for it, you've got the ideas, this is fun, and you can do it as a community. And then hopefully garner some more interest outside of just the people that are your direct listeners there, and some blog posts, and creating a landing page, or just a landing spot for all the podcasts to get their own spotlight would be probably the best thing to do.
So
Does that answer the question, or did I go off base there?
No, I mean, look, there's no right or wrong answer.
Right.
It's what you've been able to do. I think the piece you touched on but didn't really go into is systems and processes that you've had to, I guess, put into place from the beginning when you joined that weren't in the beginning when you got there. So I guess, what were those processes that you would put into place? I mean, naturally, you already talked about, moving everything over to rss.com, so aggregating that from a hosting standpoint. But what else is there that you've managed to put together?
So working with some other partner platforms as well. If it's okay to list them, that's fine. Podpage has been a great landing place, and they have their own network strategy as well, or network access. And so that's been great to be able to, everybody has their own little landing page, podcast aggregate website, which that used to be managed by somebody internally here. And anytime that there was some issue with the code or whatever, they had to get on the phone and call somebody to go and fix that. Now it's done in a very clean way, and I don't have to deal with that anymore. The other thing was, we used to have some of our online editors literally have to search our database of podcasts to find something that would match, and to find a podcast that would match an article. Now we've been able to automate that using a product that Headliner has. And so being able to work out some of these deals and find out, like, this is the process, this is what needs to happen. So what tools can we make sure that, I don't need to be involved in every step of the process? Because when you start doing something like that, it's going to start off small, and then it grows. And if you can't scale, you're eventually going to fall apart. And so scaling tools are extremely important, because without that, it's just going to, you're going to burn out, basically. And I was reaching that point earlier on, and then I was able to find the tools to be able to put that together. And then it was in a matter of like brokering their agreement. And at that point, RSS.com wasn't doing the network system at that point. And actually, we came to them and said, this is what we have. We've got this many podcasts on our network. We'd like to find a new host. What can you do with us? And the guys there, Ben, Alberto, they got on with us quickly, and we worked through all the details. They laid out a timeline to actually create the network accessibility accounts, and man, they have been phenomenal to work with. We couldn't have done what we're doing now without them.
Shout out to the bosses. There you go.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, so I'm glad you touched on and you gave, because those systems are key pieces. I mean, I think the fact that you have a legacy media company is one thing, but if you didn't have the technology to make these episodes from your network actually even more discoverable, because that's what we all struggle with, is discoverability in podcasting. So you've got the platform going like, all right, I know people are reading these articles. Hey, here are podcasts that you might find interesting. If not the podcast, the content in it that we can surface up there. I think that's a game changer. And I would be curious to know who's not doing that and why they're not doing that, right? So props to you guys on that.
Yeah, thank you. It was a tough search, but I'm so glad we found the ones that we did.
There you go. So we've talked about community. You mentioned the advertising and monetization. So I have to imagine faith-based, it's not all for free and donations. So what is a podcaster? Is it a subscription they're paying monthly to get in access? Is it a rev share? How do you guys monetize? How do you even balance content with monetization?
There's a lot of questions.
I know.
Let me try to answer them as best I can. So, if somebody needs to be hosted by the Charisma Podcast Network, we have one rate for them, and I don't want to give out the numbers right now because but it's actually not that crazy of an amount. Obviously, it's more than just if you're going to have your own podcast and you're just going to host it yourself and do this, because we're really the distribution, which, the podcasts are available anywhere. So anybody that says that, we're going to get your podcast on Spotify and Apple and all this, well, that's what every podcast hosting site should do. And if they don't, you have no business working with them. So everybody does that. But the thing is the discoverability for us. And it's just the ecosystem that we've been able to create. So if people are interested, you can go to cpnshows.com. CPN shows, Charisma Podcast Network shows.com. And then there's ways to there's a button to click join, and then you can talk to one of our account agents there to find out more information. But if you already have an RSS feed and you just want to be, if you're hosted by somebody else and you just want to join, there's a lower rate for that, obviously. We're not trying to get rich off of this, but we do need to be able to cover what we put into it as well. So, but the major benefit is the discoverability, and that's what people are going to be paying for. But we also offer regular monthly webinars where I provide teaching for our podcasters. And Greg, thank you for being a guest lecturer or a guest teacher. I need to have you back to do that. I've got a lot of good feedback from that particular episode or that particular webinar. So I do that on a monthly basis with our podcasters, and I'm available for them for, troubleshooting questions and whenever they're trying to do different things. Because a lot of people are at various different technology savvy levels. Some people don't need any help from me, and some people need help uploading. And we've eliminated a lot of that by switching to RSS.com because they make that so easy. Our previous host, which shall not be named, they made things very, very complicated, and I was getting more tech service calls and support calls for people that had trouble just uploading an episode, and there was a lot of extra hoops that people needed to be jumping through. So I knew there was a better way, so people would be paying for the system that we have, the ecosystem, and the visibility, the discoverability factor with that. So that's kind of, does that answer the question there?
Then the other side is the monetization. So are you guys, is it your media company? So is it a matter of you guys are going out there and try and find sponsors for the podcast? Is it just find sponsors and you're selling it as a package? Like here's our network of shows and we can put a host read ad, or are these, since they're faith-based shows, they're like, no, we don't want ads in there. So how do you guys work out that component?
So we work with the podcasters individually. And so anybody that wants to sponsor them, they're welcome to do that. As a network, we're not dictating if somebody can or can't have sponsors or how they're going to monetize that. But we do, I have promoted the whole monetization feature that RSS.com does have. Sorry, I keep going back to RSS.com and all the stuff that they do, but that's one of the big reasons we're with them and working with them so closely, because we couldn't do this without them. And then with the monetization with RSS.com, which is a big deal, is the fact that their bar to entry for podcasters is you need to have for monetization is you need to have, I think, 10 downloads a month or something like that before monetization ticks in. If you don't have 10 friends that can listen to your podcast every month and help you reach that threshold, then maybe you need to change the name of your podcast. I don't know. But there's so many great benefits with that. I know so many other companies that we could have worked with have that threshold set much higher. But again, the people that we were working with at RSS.com said, let's keep this accessible for the average podcaster, the passionate podcaster. And so we leave those availabilities on for our individual podcasters so they all can do with that as they want. We're not going to take a cut of of that. And so it's like we want to reward them for what they're doing, not saying, hey, you're going to pay to be on our network, but we're going to take the funds that you make. It's like, if you're going to pay to be a part of this, you're going to reap every benefit that you can milk out of your podcast through sponsorships, through programmatic ads, and all of the above.
There you go. So at the core, you've got this media company that is helping you from a discoverability, which we all say is incredibly difficult for podcasting. You've figured out systems and tools to help you actually automate and monetize for your shows, make it easier for your shows to actually do the work that they need to. And then you've got the training component, so your education on how to help the podcasters. So anything else that I'm missing or that we're missing from what Charisma Media Network or Podcast Network, I should say, is doing that's different, that's maybe separate from maybe others, or you found others are doing this, you're like, all right, I'm going to implement that over here?
Well, I haven't really seen anybody else doing what we're doing. I've seen like podcast communities, I've seen podcast groups, but I haven't seen anybody utilizing the tools that we have to do the discoverability feature. Because it's great whenever we have these articles on our website and people scroll down and you can click listen to a preview and preview of a podcast, and it doesn't just start playing from the beginning. It goes to the spot that the AI thinks that it connects with that episode. You click again, you can listen to the full episode, which is a great feature. For me, that's all I care about is discoverability. If new people aren't finding my podcast, then what am I doing? So for me, that's the biggest thing, and that's why I focused on that. I'm sure there's other features that might be a benefit, but I keep my eyes open. But I focused on those ones and made sure that system works out really well.
There you go. It definitely helps for 50 years of publishing, of the name itself and the credibility it's gotten. If someone was trying to start today going, I love this idea, but it's still the SEO game and you guys been in it long enough. And that's another reason you come to the network, because of that longevity you've had and the success in the organic side of things.
Yeah, definitely.
So I guess when we think about, I look at some of the other networks I've talked to, they're very service-based. How do we serve the podcaster here? And the mindset is that because you guys are faith-based, there's got to be a balance that you're trying to figure out. How do we figure out who are the right podcasters to join the network versus who's not? Because not everyone's going to have the same ideology. So do you guys have these are the values that you have to follow, and in order to join the network, you are on par with these values, or or not?
So we are not entirely a Christian network.
Okay.
I mean, surprisingly, we do have some Orthodox Jews that are on the network that don't believe in Jesus the way that we do, and we still love them, and they're still providing a valuable content to our audience because there's a lot of crossover. Now, we wouldn't have somebody that's New Age or Muslim or Buddhist or something that it does not fall within that Judeo-Christian background. It just wouldn't be a good fit. And to be very honest, a lot of it comes back to our website. The content that is put out there, that your podcast would be matched up with an episode, with an article. If you don't see articles that you think your podcast would be a good fit for, then the podcast network for Charisma, or the Charisma Podcast Network would not be a good fit for you. I just don't want people to waste their money, their time, or their energy, trying to fit around a square peg into a round hole. Because, you can look at our website and you can see this is what Charisma is talking about on a regular basis. And this is the Charisma audience. If you're going to have a podcast about home organization, I don't think it's going to fit. Or if you're going to talk about cooking, I don't think it's going to fit. And so, I mean, God bless you if you really wanted to do that, but you're going to be disappointed whenever you're not seeing your podcast, being matched up there. And I'm not going to go put my hands in the mix and say, let's just manually put these podcast episodes in there. No, I'm going to let the programming that we've set up, that we've worked with to make sure that we're getting what we want in there, and we don't have to, manually do something. I don't want to break something. I've got it working really good. I don't want to break something. But yeah, there's a certain place for it, and our account managers, they do a very good job of helping people decide if it's a good fit as well.
Where do you see in the next few years, you're expanding your YouTube channel? So that's, of course, video is a big piece. But like, if you're at, 70 shows, you've almost been at 100, like, is the potential, like, you want to double this? I mean, is the goal in 2026 as we're recording this, like, let's make it a 200 shows, or do you want to keep it within a certain realm?
Well, the thing that I'm looking at right now is the amount of content we're able to put out on our website. Again, so much of it goes back to that whole concept. If people are going to our website for that discoverability factor, if we can put out 30 pieces of content, of brand new content a day, that means we have there's between the different articles, you've got 4 to 6 podcasts that might be represented in there, and depending on some of those topics, there could be some repeats, and because it's going to look at the most recent things, it's going to look at the contextual clues and things like that. So if we're able to put out more, when we're able to put out more content, we'll be able to actually meet the needs of our podcasters. Right now, we're scalable, but you're just not going to have that discoverability scalability until we can get to the next level with the content that we're putting out, which we're about to make some big strides into the amount of content that's coming out on a regular basis with some other systems that we've been working on. So, even though we're a magazine and book publishing company, we are totally head first into the automation world, and the things that we're working on, I'm really excited about. I just can't talk about them yet. So
there you go. We'll have to bring you back on. We'll talk about it.
Podcast network is going to explode even more because there's more opportunities.
So it's truly, if you've got 2 podcasts that are talking about very similar things, you're like, well, I can only put one in this article, so I've got to choose. So in a sense, right now, you're limited to how many diverse voices I can have that are saying different things that I could slide them in, as opposed to too many of the same voices. It's like
essentially, yeah. So trying to expand what we're, the amount of content so that we can put more podcasts up on a regular basis, on our website. Now, there is normally multiple podcasts on within an article because there's opportunities for that. So,
all right. So we talked about, I mentioned YouTube. So let's go into the video. As you've said, you host with RSS.com. They're going down the Apple video podcast route. So where does that take the network in the future here?
So video podcasting is something I'm very interested in. I really want to see where that's going to go with discoverability itself. I know as you increase bandwidth demand with video content, there's going to be some challenges with that. So discoverability with podcasting is already challenging, and now you're going to do it with video. I know Spotify as a player does a pretty good job of recommending other content there. But for me, YouTube is king when it comes to video content, because of, Google is the number one search engine in the world. AI is coming up, right there too, but there's a lot of overlap. YouTube is the number two search engine in the world, and it's owned by Google. So people are looking there for answers. If podcasting hosts can figure out some of those hurdles to get over when it comes to video, I think there's a good chance. But I do consider podcasting the Wild West of the internet because there is no boundaries. People can talk about whatever they want, and they can, they don't have to worry about YouTube or Facebook or Instagram shutting them down because they said something naughty. You're gonna find your audience, and they're gonna find you, and stick with you, and as long as you don't make a too big of a deal, I don't think Apple will kick you off of their list, but you still have an RSS feed and you can get that out there. So I'm very interested to see how that is going to expand. And I would love to be able to, because all of my podcasting now is done through, video. And to be able to upload just the videos, instead of having to strip out the audio and do some extra steps to keep the audio in tandem with that, I'm looking forward to that step because that's going to save, I can just now upload to two different places and keep going that way and continue to build the audiences that we have and expand from there. And I love the fact that I end up listening to a lot of podcasts in the car, and to be able to have that accessibility, and I don't want to be distracted. And so, you're going to pick something that you're going to listen to in the car and stick with it. I've got a 45-minute commute, so I can actually get get a few episodes of things, or a long episode of a Sean Ryan podcast or a Joe Rogan podcast might take me a week, but that's okay. I make the most of that time. So having using a podcast app like Apple Podcasts or Spotify to be able to play those video podcasts, basically you can pick how you want that to lay out. So I'm excited about those opportunities for sure. So,
what other trends, what other things are you optimistic about podcasting as we go deeper into, I guess, whatever the establishment of podcast is 20 years into us now?
Oh, what am I looking forward to? I'm looking forward to more people finding podcasts as a legitimate source of news, information, and inspiration. And education as well. So there's a podcast for everything. And I really want to see podcasters be able to connect more with their audience. And so some of the things that I'm seeing on different players and people being able to leave comments and to be able to connect that way, I'm excited about that. And I want to see where that goes, because any feedback you get as a podcaster is like gold. That's going to keep you going, especially as you're starting, because again, as we talked about earlier in this conversation, you're in a room by yourself out on the West Coast, and I'm in a room by myself on the East Coast, and it can be kind of lonely sometimes. And so to get that feedback from somebody that's actually listening is going to really help people in the next phase, I think, of podcasting.
Sometimes I go days without a hug. I get it. It's lonely in this room, right?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you bring that up, because it makes me think of, for anyone that hasn't listened to my episode that I did with Peter Ferroli from Pantheon and what he's doing with liquid content and gamification. So it sounds like something that you'd be interested in understanding, like, how do we have more engagement with our audience, and looking at what can we do not only from discoverability, but also feedback, because we're all looking for that.
Yeah. Please send me that episode. I'm interested in that myself too. Like, I'm I'm just trying to keep my head above water sometimes. I've got other responsibilities outside of the podcast network. And doing the YouTube channel is I'm in charge of publicity for our authors. And so I'm always talking to podcast hosts and YouTubers and TV bookers and things like that, trying to get our authors promoted. So I spend a lot more time doing that. So if I didn't systematize everything else that I'm doing, there's no way that I could keep my head above water. So anything that's going to help automate, whatever, systematize, automate. Yeah. Anything that's going to help with that, I'm all for. And I'm excited about the next phases of podcasting. And I'm glad that it's difficult to keep up with it, because when I do find it, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And so instead of getting like little bits of it, I'm getting bigger chunks. But that's my own fault.
I mean, that is, I think, the hard part, but also the benefit of a network. Like, your job is theoretically, how do I stay on top of everything? To create a system so that it's easier for you to operate all these shows, but also, as you've done and we've talked about and doing the trainings, educate podcasters, because let's be honest, their day job is not the podcast. Your day job, as you just described, is not fully the podcast, but it's still to stay more on top of it than they are. And that's why they're coming to you.
Yep.
Well, you talked about the other part of your day job is around authors. So I always like to know, you've already mentioned one book that is coming out in September, but what is one book that you would recommend to people?
Oh, man. A book that I'm reading right now is by Cap Chatfield, The Power to Prosper. Because there's a lot of times Christians have this mentality that in order to be holy, you need to be poor and you need to be, kind of chaste and, give away everything. Well, there's also verses in the Bible that talk about, that the righteous will prosper. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but God wants us to be able to be fruitful and multiply. There's sometimes the pendulum swings too far one direction, and you need to find that balance there. And Cap is doing a great job in this book of explaining that you can find your calling with the Lord, and what He's created you to do. And then if He's created you to do that, He's going to fund that calling. And so it's not just about, having fancy cars and doing that, but it's really having your purpose and running with that and seeing God provide and making a difference in the world. And so there's, because we publish so many books, I can't read everything all the time. That's why I use an app to help read the books to me as I'm driving. But that's one of the books that I'm excited about right now. It's called The Power to Prosper by Cap Chatfield. And he's actually a big YouTuber. He's got over 1 million subscribers on his channel, and he has learned these lessons the hard way. And he wants to help people find their calling and their purpose in life, and be able to find God's provision and thrive in that. So that's one of them. Another one let's see. Let me just turn around real fast.
One's good. Okay. One's good. Because the next question is going to be, discoverability on podcasting is difficult. So what's one podcast you would recommend to people that you feel should be listened to more? I mean, you've already talked about Joe Rogan is one you listen to, but look, everyone's listening to Joe if everyone's listening to Joe. But what would be another one? Okay,
my kind of guilty pleasure podcast that I love is called No Dumb Questions. Okay, and if you might have seen these guys on YouTube, Destin Sandlin, his YouTube channel is Smarter Every Day, and then Matt Whitman, his YouTube channel is called the 10-Minute Bible Hour. These two guys have become like best friends, and it is truly a best friend podcast. And they have such in-depth conversations, but make it very accessible. That it's one of those conversations that every time I listen to it, I want to be their friends. I want to sit with them and just join the conversation. Matt comes from a historical theologian background, but he's very witty and a bit of a dry, sarcastic sense of humor. I love these guys so much. And Matt, and then Destin Sandlin is a rocket scientist, basically.
Oh, wow.
He's worked for NASA. He's done a lot of really, really cool stuff. But so they come at different topics from very different angles, from raising a family to how did World War I actually get started and what was everything behind that. And they did an episode about the Red Baron, and just wild things that you just may never think about. But it's really no dumb questions, and so they'll kind of tackle everything. That's one of my guilty pleasure podcasts, and I love it.
There you go. We'll have all the book and the podcast in the show notes. So I guess if we wrap up here, anything that we haven't covered that you would want someone that's listening to this to know, like what is it maybe that they're not knowing about a podcast network that they should know when they're thinking about whether they join your network or start a network on their own?
Well, let me just tell you briefly my own personal story and how a podcast and a podcast network changed my life. So I was a TV producer for a Christian network in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was there from 2011 to 2021. 2011, I started volunteering. Volunteering turned into a part-time job. Part-time job turned into a full-time job as an assistant producer. And then the lead producer of the daily program moved away. And for 6.5 years, I was in charge of the daily program. So 1,387 episodes later, I made a shift to move to Florida and work with the Charisma Podcast Network. But that would have not happened if I didn't start my own podcast. I had such great opportunities to meet different guests and have really life-changing conversations in the green room. And just the connections that I made with people before the shows, after the shows, and I've remained friends with many of them to this day. And I really felt like God gave me inspiration on how to frame a podcast and how to really get that started. And so in 2019, I started a podcast called Along the Way, all squished together along the way, and then started doing that. And then a guy that I had as a mentor of mine, who was a former guest on the TV program, was actually, whenever I started my podcast, I reached out to him because I heard him talk about his podcast. And it wasn't just a pastor that was just repurposing his sermons. It was somebody that was actually doing what I was more interested in. And so it turns out that he was the guy that at Charisma that actually started the Charisma Podcast Network. I started my podcast, was getting feedback from him, was really excited about it. I didn't quite qualify to be on the podcast network at that point, and I didn't have the extra funds to be able to join that other way. But in 2020, everything changed in the world, as we all remember, with COVID, and everybody was locked down and shut down. And so the Charisma Podcast Network has a show called Charisma News, and the hosts that were working at Charisma at the time would take one of the articles and do it as a news podcast. And so there was a couple of them that left during that time, and because of my connection and because of doing the podcast already, they came to me and said, "John, we can put your podcast on the network if you want to do a daily news podcast. Just basically take one story, and it's the byline or the tagline was one story well told." And so basically, I loved it because it gave me the opportunity to take something that was written for reading, turn it into a script that was great for speaking, which really helped me for my day job. But then after doing a couple hundred of these stories, an opportunity opened up for me at Charisma Media, and I was able to make that shift. But if I hadn't started my podcast and there wasn't a podcast network, I would not be where I am today. And now I moved to Florida, got married, and now my wife and I are expecting a baby. So there's so many wonderful things that podcasting that I can attest that I can point to if podcasting has opened up those doors for me.
I love that. I mean, look, we all know I say life is about time and relationships. So clearly, the podcast consistency, the relationships, and just the tenacity here. That's a great story. I think that's a perfect way to end, John. And I want to thank you then, as always, for the relationship we've had, but also coming on and sharing some of this knowledge about Charisma.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be asked. Thank you, my friend.
Have a good one. Well, you've made it this far, and I really appreciate it. I truly do. we all know most of us don't make it to the end of the episode. So if you made it this far, if you allow me a few extra minutes of your time, let me share my thoughts on my conversation with John. To start, we talked about matching podcast episodes to written articles, not just linking them, but dropping listeners into the exact moment that's contextually relevant. That's a very different way to think about distribution and discovery, and it's a big part of what makes Charisma stand out. But that wasn't the only thing that stood out to me. First, another thing was, because they have a strong content engine, podcasters actually pay to join the network. In return, they get access to the built-in distribution, a community of like-minded creators, and a larger ecosystem, while still maintaining their own monetization through programmatic ads, sponsorships, and more. Second thing that came to me was the constraint and where it actually fits. It's not the number of podcasts, it's actually the number of articles they can publish. That's the bottleneck. Most people think more shows equals more growth. Here, it's about expanding distribution surfaces. As John said, they're working on fixing that, but it's something interesting to think about. Speaking of which, third thing was the systems and operations. They're critical. That's what allowed them to manage close to 100 shows, drive millions of page views, and still operate efficiently. And as John said, he's got another job on top of running the network. The fourth thing is, the more of these conversations I have, the more I realize how differently each network approaches the business and how much they can learn from each other. Maybe Charisma can look at the sampler feed like Peter at Pantheon or Rich at RageWorks are working on. And maybe those others can look at Charisma's article to audio alignment discovery. There's a lot of cross-learning here, and hopefully you're gaining the insights that you should be by listening to this show. There's so much more that I gained from this. I'm hoping that you have a lot of notes as well. But those are some of the things I want to share with you. There's so much more I enjoyed and learned from my conversation, and I'm sure you took plenty of notes yourself. Please share them. I would love to know what you're learning from this. That said, once again, thank you for tuning in. To the few people, I got a couple more 5-star reviews. Thank you on Apple. I've received a lot of DMs. That means the world to me. I love having these conversations, so please keep reaching out. The show wouldn't be possible without some of the amazing companies, so I have to say thank you. The show is produced by the amazing team at Stories and Strategies. If you don't know them, reach out. Highly recommend it. You wouldn't be disappointed. I'm using RSS.com for my podcast hosting. Because let's be honest, podcast hosting is more than just storage. RSS.com provides so many features that enable a great podcast experience, maximum distribution. They have a community to learn from, monetization solutions, and so much more. As we heard during this episode, systems and processes are key, and that's why I've used Northflow, a dedicated project management platform built by podcasters for podcasters. And of course, content repurposing is crucial, and that's why I use Cast Magic for all my content repurposing and my guest assets, so much more. As I say, life is about time and relationships. You have no clue where one conversation is going to take you. This is why I'm able to have this show and provide you these great conversations. This is why I love networking. You have no clue where listening to this conversation today is going to take you in the future. So actually, your future self thanks you for tuning in. I live on LinkedIn. Reach out. Let's talk. To those who've already, thank you. I appreciate you. And that means that this podcast is doing exactly what it should be, creating these conversations that matter. I have a newsletter, as I talked about earlier. Please like, subscribe. You get to discover all new podcasts because, once again, discovery is incredibly difficult. Until next time, I appreciate you.